Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to remind those who are attending the tech session, The Future of SDN, a panel discussion, you'll head across the hall now to the Giovanni room. And afterwards, you'll come back here after that panel session for the final closing panel that will be happening here. But right now, I'd like to present to you 5 perspectives on open education in Ontario, brought to you by eCampus Ontario. I present to you to start today, Lena Patterson, Director of Operations at eCampus Ontario. Lena?
Thank you. Do I turn it on?
You just go right ahead.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So you should be rocking.
I am. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you. Okay. It's my great pleasure to bring these wonderful people to you today. They're representing 5 different perspectives from the post-secondary education system. We've got representation from faculty, from instructional designer, from a student, from a librarian, and from an administrator. So we're really excited to share those perspectives with you today. So I'm going to start with just a really brief definition of OER, just so to make sure we're all on the same page. So an OER stands for Open Educational Resource, and it is free, it is openly licensed, and it can be repurposed by others. And the resource piece of it can mean anything from a course, a module, course material, textbook, a video, test, software, basically anything that is used for teaching and learning and research in the classroom. So the OER conversation is we're having it in the context of kind of 3 or 4 critical statistics. The first one is that textbook prices have tripled in the last 4 decades, and that accounts for the cost of inflation incorporated in that statistic. Our colleague out in BC did a recent study where he surveyed BC post-secondary education students, and he found that 54% of them were not buying their textbook. And he also found that 30% of them were downloading it from the internet. That is just scratches the surface in terms of what we know students do and the lengths that they go to in order to get the resources that they need for their course. So they are not conforming to the traditional resources that are used in their classrooms. They're getting around it in all sorts of interesting ways. So I'm just going to launch right into our panel discussion, and I'm going to start with Nick Baker from the University of Windsor. And Nick, I really want to touch on how we ensure that a curious faculty member becomes an active adopter and user of OER. How do we get from that curiosity to the use?
It's a really good question. I think we have to start with the curiosity piece. In my role as the Director of Open Learning, I find most faculty are not aware of OERs. They certainly don't know what that encompasses. They don't know what they can do with them. There is certainly some kind of fear and mistrust around them. But I wanted to start with a little story about my own experience, I guess, just recently. So I've been out of the undergraduate classroom for nearly a decade now in administrative roles and so on. And I got the opportunity to teach a non-major undergraduate course at the university, and I was handed a package that had a course outline that didn't have any learning outcomes, that had a small course description and a textbook. And that's how it had essentially been taught for the last decade. So I looked at it and said, well, there's got to be a better way to do this, not only pedagogically, but if I can't manage to teach a course using open access resources, then what chance do I have of convincing anyone else that they can do this? So I found an open textbook through BC Campus. It's actually an OpenStax textbook, and the course is in the area of science, technology, and society. So there's lots of resources that I can draw from. There's multimedia everywhere. My students are going to that material, so I at least need to help them pass what's good in that stuff that they find. And about 2 weeks before the course started, I had about 80 students had enrolled in the course. I sent out a message telling them that their textbook for this course would be an open access text, which meant this, all of these things. And I was deluged with a flood of emails from students saying, this is fantastic, I've never had a course like this before, I've never had a free textbook. What do you mean the textbook is free? And there was a little bit of kind of interesting mistrust from that. But then I started to get emails from lots of other students saying, I heard that this course has an open access policy. I'm going to join the course for that reason. I'm an international student. And then a group of other students who came to me, who came as a group, actually came to see me and said, this textbook, because it's digital first, helps us with our various disabilities that we have. And so there was lots of validation for me as a faculty member having made the right choice. And that reinforcement from students has been gold, both for me as an instructor and also in my role. So I think that's really important. And I think people in my kind of role have to spread that word. We have to be talking about it everywhere that we go. And we need to get to a point where we're valuing the contribution of OERs to education in different ways, I think.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. So just to cycle back a little bit, that gives us a bit of a perspective on the student and faculty piece, which is at the core of everything here. But I want Stephen to touch on kind of the bigger picture and talk to us about what's different from an OER to traditional publisher materials. What are the key kind of things that differentiate the two?
Okay, well, I mean, when it comes to publishers, like traditional publishing versus OER publishing, it's one of the big things is with regard to the intellectual property and control of the material. And publishers, traditional publishers, of course, have exercised I'm sorry, am I getting a lot of feedback and echo on this? Move it down a little bit, maybe that's a little bit better. Is that a little bit better? Okay, sorry. So where was I? Yes, so a lot of it is with regard to the control of the material and the open access model, the open education model and OER model allows for a lot more flexibility with regard to the material. And that's why most of the major open platforms such as eCampus and BC Campus and the Rebus community and so on insist on a CC BY license, which permits a full range of the quote-unquote 5 Rs, which are retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute the material, which is something that is not always possible with regard to traditional publisher materials. The materials are heavily controlled, and once you have that, there's very little you can do with this. You get the material that you're given, and that doesn't necessarily mean that means you can't necessarily adapt or adjust it. So if you're using an American textbook in a Canadian classroom, for example, you might be paying the full amount for the textbook, and some of it might be irrelevant. And so that's a very important thing. Another big thing, of course, is with regard to cost. And for students, this is a major thing. So the traditional publisher costs have skyrocketed. I think we are all aware of that. And as somebody who went to law school, I can tell you that legal texts are obscene, more so than others, and legal publishers are extremely expensive, and a lot of the legal publishing materials, and having worked as a law librarian, I could say that the value is not necessarily always there. And since 1977, the textbook prices have actually gone up over 1,000%, and actually the statistics I have for that actually were up to a few years ago, so I'm sure it's more than that. From 1977 to I think 2005, it was nearly 1,100%. And so that feeds into issues with regard to students being able to access the materials. They might not be able to afford the materials that they have in their classes, and therefore they are taking shortcuts, such as not buying the textbook, taking an older version of it, et cetera, and open materials that they don't have to pay for allows them to actually do better in their courses. With regard to efficacy, there is a number of peer-reviewed studies that covered over 120,000 students, and 95% of them had the same or better outcomes using OER versus traditional publishing materials. And so, I mean, I think you can really do that equation between affordability and access and improved outcomes. And the other issues with regard to perceptions of OER, and I think that this is something that people have, there's seen to be a negative perception. If it's free, it's somehow less than. However, there have been studies on the perceptions, and it shows that only 15% feel that it's actually that the materials are worse. 50% say the same, and 35% say that it's better. So, I mean, these are just a few of the key issues that we need to consider, because if you have material that you're able to adapt and reuse, you can also do, of course, you can mix and match. You can use some traditional materials. It doesn't necessarily have to be a zero-sum game, and I think that that's a misconception that some people have, is that it's either or. It doesn't have to be, but it can be another arrow in your quiver, so to speak, in terms of how you set up your course and have your materials. And one other thing that I also want to mention is it doesn't always have to be just textbooks. It can be things such as test banks and various exams and stuff like that. So there's a wide range of things that can be OER. It doesn't just have to be text materials. I think that that's also something that people forget. So.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great. That gets us a little bit into that space where we're really talking about teaching and what it means to use a resource in your classroom. How do you engage your students? How do they participate in the creation of the resource even? How do they assess each other? How do they work together to kind of learn in that more active way? So I wanted to get Stella to touch on how OER has the potential to change the way that we teach.
Yeah, so like Nick, I designed and taught a course that incorporated open educational resources, not only in the sense that I used them, so the course materials were really a collection, a bricolage of existing open materials, but also one of the outcomes of the course was that students had to demonstrate that they knew how to find and repurpose and create open materials themselves. And what I found really interesting was that the motivation level was exceptional. And I connect that to the notion of authenticity. So you probably, if you've heard David Wiley speak before about open-related assignments, he talks about this notion of what he calls, I think it's wastebasket assignments, where the students will be required to create some work that might be submitted in paper format, or maybe submitted through a learning management system, which is password protected, like Blackboard. And so they submit the work, the professor sees it, and no one else does. And the students know this, and that's not that motivating. I found that when the students were aware that potentially the entire planet, certainly their classmates and I and others in the college community, but possibly the entire world might be able to, could view these materials they put together and might repurpose it themselves, then it did something to their motivation, something to their willingness to really go the extra mile in putting together something of really high quality. And I found they were very excited by that. So that was really a wonderful finding in my offering. Another interesting element that I found was how easily this tied into essential employability skills. So the Ontario colleges are required to have students practice and demonstrate transferable skills, and these include digital literacy and information literacy. So here, not only were they practicing these skills that are related to curating, producing, sourcing, and all of this, but they also they now had these objects that prospective employers could see, and they seem to discuss this quite a bit. So the work that they did was related to their programs. My course was a general elective, and so they had the option to focus the objects they were producing for our course on their area of study, their program of study. And so they were as they discussed, they had to reflect on their learning. They continually mentioned this prospect of having prospective employers access and maybe even use their work, which in some cases it seemed that prospective employers did tell them they were intending to use some of their materials. So those were some of the happy findings that I had in my course experience.
That's great. We have a little bit of extra time on this one, so I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the shift from, the textbook as a canned kind of piece of material for the course into this more interactive space, and where do we need to focus as government agencies, as funders? Where is the kind of critical piece that's missing in OER to support faculty to kind of move towards those kinds of outcomes that you're talking about?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And as an instructional designer, it's something that I think about all the time because I want to encourage faculty to get involved. But I think primarily we have to articulate very clearly what the support plan is. And that might mean initially just providing examples to faculty of what's out there. But beyond, so sometimes giving examples is really quite motivating for them. But I think now more than ever, we're moving more, certainly in the college system, we're moving away from strictly text-based materials. Dissemination of information takes a form other than text very often. And so we're in a good place because I'm finding that faculty competencies are broader now. So whereas before they were principally subject matter experts and typically very talented, engaging lecturers, now they have to be very well versed in things like AODA, the Accessibility Act, universal design, copyright for sure. So they have all these new competencies, and they also seem to be willing to do production. So production other than writing. But that takes time. It takes support. It takes probably some professional development. And so if there's a clearly articulated plan for providing these supports to them, I find they're more willing to engage.
Thanks. That's great. Okay, turning this a little bit into a different direction now, I want to ask Danny to talk about what an open textbook means from a student's perspective. How might that, we heard a little bit from Nick about some of the reactions he was getting from students, but as a student yourself, what does that mean for you in your learning experience?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think it's pretty obvious that students are facing increasingly large financial barriers when it comes to post-secondary education. And so recently, I was elected to be the president of our Science Students Council, which represents our science and medical science students at Western, which is about 5,000 students. And the largest point of my platform, and a large point that got a lot of traction with students, was bringing open educational resources to Western. I think, whether it's tuition fees that are increasing, if not, it's ancillary fees. Students have this huge struggle to finance their education. So I think affordability is the #1 thing for students. And then I think following closely after that is the experience within the classroom. One big focus of student advocates as a whole has been a big focus on teaching within the classroom and how institutions are really focusing on the delivery of knowledge, if you will, in classrooms. So I think the ability to kind of customize content that is presented to students to allow instructors to get more interested and engage students, whether it is implementing their own research into what's being taught, or just being able to customize things to their teaching style. I think that's huge for the classroom experience, and I think that really resonates with students for this education that a lot of students do have a struggle financing. And so recently, having talked to faculty administrators about bringing OER to the Faculty of Science, I think this has been a common theme today, but the idea that there needs to be kind of a cultural shift when it comes to open content. And so one of our recommendations as student government has always been to present informative presentations to faculty, working with our administrators to kind of show them some of these statistics that we have discussed earlier today, whether it is proven efficacy or proven quality of open educational resources. So I think it's kind of a responsibility of students too to kind of share what we would like from our institutions, what we would like from our instructors, and I think it's a mutual benefit, if anything.
Yeah, that's great, Danny. I really appreciate you being here, and I think we have another student who's at this conference somewhere. I saw on Twitter that Danny was like, I'm the only student here, but then someone else, anyways. So it's so important to have the student voice incorporated into all of these discussions. They're the people that we're all working for and towards. So it's just wonderful to have you here. So I know, Danny, that you've had some really interesting conversations with your administrators at Western about how OER gets incorporated, and this is a question that I spend a lot of time thinking about. What are the best ways to kind of make change at colleges and universities in Ontario and kind of inspire people to think differently about the way they're doing things. And so I was wondering, Nick, in your experience as an administrator and also as a faculty, if you could talk a little bit about what the most significant barriers are to OER adoption and the most significant incentives. What are kind of the key things that we need to hit when we're out there talking to people?
Sure. I'll start with the barriers. There are, we've surfaced some of those already in the discussion. So, there's certainly a lack of awareness. That's one of the first things we come up against. And my office, when we're working with faculty, we basically have an open first policy. So give us a little bit, give us some time to try and find you an open access resource, and let's have a look at it and see if it's equivalent to what you're using now or what you're thinking of using. We had this experience recently with a faculty member who had assigned a text that was worth $574. We found an open access text that had all of what he was going to use and more. And unfortunately, he still chose to adopt the $574 textbook. But part of that is because of the relationship with that publisher. So he has a long-standing relationship with this publisher. He trusts them. He doesn't trust OpenStax. He's never heard of them. He doesn't trust something that people can get for free. Because he's used to seeing other things around that are free, that are openly available, and is equating those things, unfortunately, to each other. So, I don't want to demonize publishers. Publishers have a role. I don't see them disappearing anytime soon. Their role may be shifting and changing over time. And I've had some very interesting conversations with publishers recently about that, about what their role might be in this kind of more open world. But they are very good at getting faculty to believe that if you adopt this set of resources, you're not going to have to do any work. This is going to take a whole lot of work off of your plate, and just let us manage all of these other pieces. So there's a couple of problems with that. One is that in many cases they're right, in that a lot of our open access texts, for example, don't yet have, they're quite variable in the amount of extra resources that come with them. A lot of them don't look like the traditional publisher resources that people might be used to, but they're getting better, and there's more of them appearing. And the other issue for me with that kind of relationship is that faculty often are very invested in their own IP and in their own academic freedom. And by handing that over to a publisher, you've basically given up your own academic freedom and said, well, I don't really care about that piece anymore. So a lot of the conversations that I have with faculty are around that. Most of them haven't thought about it in that way. So that's an important way of looking at it. There is certainly variability in access to resources, to good quality OERs by discipline. Again, that's growing by the day, and things like our Open Textbook Initiative here in Ontario are going to add to that and help us address those issues. But in the sciences where I work, there are tons of OERs that we could use that are really high quality. They're well ahead of some of the other disciplines. We need to fill in some of those gaps. The other thing is that teaching is really a silent profession in higher education. It's the thing that we all do, it's the thing that we don't talk about. We rarely talk about it to our colleagues in a way that's meaningful or that really shares what we get at in the heart of our teaching. Now that's, a generalization, but it's a reasonable one in my experience. And what OER use does is makes your teaching public. If you are creating open access resources and putting them out there, you are admitting to the world, this is what I think about the way that I teach. And that's a very difficult thing for many people to do. You're giving up control, and faculty are experts in their discipline area. They're often not experts in pedagogy. And there is some insecurity around that. So that's a challenge. Now, on the incentive side of the table, though, the student advocacy piece can't be underestimated. The more noise we can get from students that's heard in every realm that you can possibly make that noise, the better. My institution has just recently adopted an open access first policy, or a set of guidelines or principles for designing courses, and that was driven by a student body. They managed to get it through Senate as an adopted policy now. Now we have to work on actually implementing the thing, but that would not have happened had we not had a strong student voice in the current year that we have. Some of the other things that I've used as incentives, or that my institution uses, things like release time. So recognizing that to engage in this really well takes some time and effort. We're not at a point culturally yet in this province, and generally in North America in higher education, where that's considered normal, where the amount of time that I would spend on developing a face-to-face course would be fairly similar to what I would do in an online course, because I'm going to use the same kinds of resources in those things. We're not in that space yet. So for the moment, there need to be additional incentives. And sometimes that's a recognition of time, sometimes it's a recognition in the promotion and tenure process. And just thinking about what OERs mean in different ways. Some places use cash incentives as well. In the college system, it's a little bit easier than it is in the university sector, but that's another, surprisingly, driving force. If you want to get faculty to do something, give them something.
Yeah. Julia, did you want to jump in on the recognition piece? I see you've added it there.
Well, I feel beyond time and money, it's almost a systemic thing about tenure. And so we were at the last session, it was brought up. Too close to you. It was brought up that places like UBC and some of the other places are building that in. So the use of OER is something that you could integrate. And so I feel like that kind of systemic change would really shift the tide, because at the end of the day, your teaching is only as important as your administrators think so.
Absolutely. I'm really interested in that not trusting something that's free piece, because, that's really, I think the internet has kind of led us to that place. And if you think about what we thought about Wikipedia 5 years ago in terms of education and kind of where it is now, it's transformed a little bit, I think, our thinking about what is a legitimate source, and the fact that it's free and the fact that it's being actively contributed to doesn't undercut the quality, it actually adds to it. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that having faculty review each other's work is really going to be the thing that is going to lend credibility to this whole system, and I think we need to incentivize that work, because it's really important that faculty are compensated for that time that it takes. Thank you. To do that work. And it's definitely in our plans to incentivize that work through the open library that we're bringing over from BC campus. So stay tuned for that. Okay, one last quick question. We've still got time. Are institutions responding to the increase in activity around OER? So really high level, we talked about tenure. Is there anything else that institutions can do? I'm thinking at the president level, the VPA level, to adopt and to kind of take in open policies or champion other ways of promoting OER. I'm going to just leave this one open to anybody who wants. Nick.
It's really important that administrators talk about this stuff and use the platform that they have to legitimize it. So the currency of academia is citations and impact factors and impact rates. Let me tell you, if you start producing open access resources, those citation rates go through the roof. And you have to have a situation where your administrators recognize that and value it. The most blunt instrument that we have is the tenure and promotion process, and we're seeing some shift in those provincially and across the country to recognize OERs and recognize different kinds of impact that you might have as part of your role as a knowledge creator, as a knowledge generator, as an academic. That's part of what we're supposed to be doing. They also have to not just talk about it, but actually resource the development of these things. So you have to understand that when you develop open access resources or other types of non-traditional teaching, if you like, that takes resources. It's a team-based approach, and that's another thing that makes it a little bit difficult for faculty because they're used to working by themselves. Now I've got to work in this team, and that means I have to make everything visible to all of those team members for it to work. So having those teams available to faculty is really important. One of the things that I think both our presidents and government can do is to recognize the impact of open resources on our communities. So they're asking us to think in our SMA process about how do we integrate with our community, what kinds of benefits does our community get from the work that we do. Making our materials open and openly available to our community has a huge impact or a huge potential impact that we're often not really thinking about yet. We're just touching the tip of the iceberg as far as that goes.
I wanted to bring back something that I heard in an earlier session. Rory McGreal made a fantastic point about sustainability. And this is a question I get all the time. Granting agencies, Hewlett, the Gates Foundation, lots of different governments, it's all one, the money is one time, it's not continuous, and the idea is that we get people off the ground. And so a lot of the comments I hear back from colleges and universities and people that we work with is that there's this real concern about making it sustainable. And if you weren't in Rory's session this morning, the panel he was on, it was great, and he made the excellent point that you can take the savings that the system in K-12 and that, in this case it's student savings, but there are efficiencies to be gained here, and you can repurpose them for sustainability plans that are driven by the educators who are in the system. So we're almost out of time, and I wanted to give everybody in the audience an option to ask any questions that they might have. I want to just, before we go and we lose the opportunity, I wanted to thank Julia for her incredible live illustration. I hope you enjoyed it. Julia has an amazing portfolio on Flickr. You can find her on Flickr where you can see all of the previous work that she's done. You'll see recurring themes.
And it's all released under Creative Commons.
All CC.
Feel free to use the 5 Rs.
If you want to talk about impact, you should see the kinds of citations this woman gets.
Yeah.
Putting this stuff out there, people all around the world know who Julia is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Come on. Yeah. No? I thought that was a hand.
Can I make one comment? And it's not to be negative, but to put in context where we're at in Canada with open access, resource development and adoption. If you look at the global OER map, where they dynamically map adoption of OERs around the world through a variety of sources, there's a big black hole where Canada is. There's a little bit in BC, there's a little bit starting to appear here, and a little bit starting to appear in the Maritimes, but it's really largely a big black hole. So we need to be better at doing more with that material. It's out there, it's available, it's free, it's great to use, to adapt, to adopt, to adapt to our local context. We just have to have the will to do it. And funding legitimizes that too.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
So all these materials, do they tend to be created in a community or by individuals or small numbers of individuals? I mean, like a book or like Wikipedia, for example.
Yes.
And then once they're out, who does the curation of the material?
Well, it could be anything. So in many cases, in the objects that I've seen, they seem to have been produced by an individual, and very often, and it could be, so open educational resources, as you know, could be anything. And they could be a video, it might be a lesson plan, it might be a graphic, it might be a textbook. And so it seems to me, in the pieces that I tend to use smaller pieces, and they tend to be created by an individual. But I know in the case of textbooks, for example, these tend to be bigger, more organized teams working on those.
And they work just like traditional publisher textbooks. So you'll have a publishing team. It might be a group of faculty who are writing the text. They work in a traditional publishing way in the model that BC Campus uses, for example. They're peer-reviewed just like you would find a publisher thing. Most of them have an editor. So they're very similar apart from the cost.
Yeah, and the other model that I wanted to mention is Rebus Community, which is essentially crowdsourcing for creation of OER. Anybody can sign up and join it and be a part of the community. So there are textbooks and whatnot that are being written through the Rebus community that, I think the sky's the limit really in terms of the number of people, as long as the quality is there and then the peer review is good and all that stuff. So I mean, there are initiatives out there and it can really run the gamut.
I just want to say, we got funded at Brock University for an eCampus Ontario grant, and it was 41 academics across Canada worked on these video vignettes. So basically they wrote, they edited together, they created the videos, we did animations. So it's not just a textbook, it can be beyond a textbook, but now they're being used in college and university contexts. So there's a wide applicability.
Oh, and can I just add one more thing to my answer? By the way, when I said that it tends to originate from an individual, the objects that I use, I don't want to ignore the fact that the idea is that these are meant to be repurposed. Ideally, they would be repurposed in any way. So probably it's iterative, and ultimately there will be multiple people involved in the iterations. But the originator, I find, tends to be one. Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the fun, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
As an academic, tracking what happens to it.
Yeah.
Where does it go? How does it change? What kind of adjustments do people make? Because one of the things that we're looking for when we CC license is that it's contributed back to the community so that we can track where it's gone and how many people are using it, what kind of students are using it.
And it's so beautiful how local and current things can become when they have a Creative Commons license on them that allows modification. Then it allows the educators to to take content and add their very local and current expertise, which they often cannot do with publishers' materials.
And I think just to add, in terms of a repository, which I think kind of leads into this, because really the answer to your question is anything, whatever, like people, bits and pieces, it's very, the sky's the limit, really. But in terms of gathering things together so that they are discoverable, that's a really important question, and there are several repositories that exist. The one that is most maybe familiar to us is the BC Campus Open Textbook Library, and we are bringing that library here to Ontario principally because it's been proven over time, and there's been some great work done by Dave Ernst about this that shows that having a local skin on something really increases adoption. So if it's part of your local context, your community, then it really enhances that feeling of collaboration with people in your circles. So the sky's the limit, really, and the internet is massive, but we need to build these little pockets of community where people feel kind of safe to dip their toe in and explore, and so that's why eCampus Ontario is bringing the Open Textbook Library to Ontario. And the thing about it is that it is just BC Campus's library, and all of the reviews that are contributed by faculty that come from Ontario, that come from BC, that come from Alberta, are all going to be encapsulated within that network, but it will be for Ontario. So that's another important point about repositories, I think.
And it's two-way too, Lena. So anything that we contribute to that repository, to the Ontario repository, is then visible to OpenStax and to BC Campus and to the other big aggregators that find this stuff. So while it's a local skin on it, it's globally accessible.
Yeah. That was a long answer to one question. Are there any other questions?
I have a question for Danny Chang, which perhaps the panel can also address. I want to see if you have any advice for the educators in the room and how to actually get them to motivate students to advocate for OERs.
Gotcha. Well, I think one thing, even as a student, is a lot of my peers don't even know what open textbooks are. And I think that's a big issue in itself, showing that there aren't too many classrooms who use these kinds of resources. And again, like when I was campaigning for my role, so many people were so interested, like how do I get a free textbook? Like, of course I want free textbooks. So I think one thing is, again, to get students to advocate for something, it has to be accessible. I think that's a big thing. And then from there, then students can create feedback and then bring it to their educators and kind of, say that this is how we would improve it. This is how, we want to continue improving what's going on. And one example I have is, so one of my professors in applied mathematics, she is always so open about receiving student feedback when it comes to her learning content in the classroom. And she even herself customizes it quite often. So I think step one would be to obviously, start implementing these kinds of things. Whether it's small, it doesn't have to be necessarily a textbook, but then having students at the table and giving you feedback, I think that's essentially the goal of any student advocate. I think Chris can speak to that, being a past student advocate himself. But, I think that's huge. Getting a seat at the table and being able to come to a consensus.
Anything else? We have 2 minutes. Yeah.
What about social justice? And I was thinking how that's come up a lot with OER. How do they connect? Can you explain?
From my perspective, so the question was, how does social justice and open educational practice mesh? How do those two things go together? And from my perspective, the primary driver for me is to enhance access, and that means improving the way that we deal with social justice issues in the classroom. And it also means that because I'm using materials that are, okay, so they're free for a start, that's one big piece. Because they're digital first, I take away some of the other barriers for certain kinds of disabilities, and then they're portable, so students can take them anywhere. Most students are spread all over the world at the moment, and these, they can slip in a digital textbook to places where they may not have been allowed to bring in the physical textbook that we're dealing with now. And then there's also just the perspective that I can change by using an open access resource. So I can incorporate a whole lot of different perspectives that may not have appeared in the original material, which allows me to have a different kind of conversation with my students.
And also, I'll just add that definitely there's all of those affordances. And then also, as a subject proper, when you require students to be engaged in the open movement, then you're providing an opportunity for discourse around access to information and to learning environments. And you're allowing students to be participants, active participants, sometimes in generation of materials, sometimes in the case of my course, they were involved in actual social awareness campaigns. They were producing social awareness campaigns around this.
It allows that to be global, right? It's giving them access to a global community that they may not have thought about before. So my students are currently communicating with students in Africa and Asia around certain grand challenges, if you like, that they wouldn't have thought about had we used just our local context.
So thanks, everybody. Find us on Twitter. All of our Twitter handles are down there. Thanks, Julia. And thanks for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Lena, so much. And thank you, panel. A big round of applause for everyone. We also have some lovely parting gifts for you. So when you leave the stage on this side, please come and see me. I get to get you gifties. I'm the hostess with the mostest. They let me give you a fabulous prizes and merchandise, everybody. So again, a big round of applause for everyone on the panel right now. And as they're leaving the stage, at the same time, the people that were also doing the other tech workshop are also going to be coming in. So we're doing a little bit of a changeover here in the next couple of moments. We'll be starting with another panel shortly. So just give us a few moments while we change over for panels, ladies and gentlemen.